What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another breaking news episode here on Mets Central. And we got some very big news tonight, pause, as the New York Mets ended up signing Devin Williams to a 3-year. The money's a little confusing as of right now because there is deferrals, but from Jeff Passan's tweet, it was over at least $50 million guaranteed dollars. Obviously, like I said, we got a John Heyman tweet as well, which showed and that there were some deferrals in the deal as well. But an interesting deal, nonetheless. Obviously, I think the big question everyone is asking right now: does this take the Mets out of the Edwin Diaz sweepstakes? And at least from what we heard right now, out of guys like Will Salmon, Andy Martino, and Jeff Passan, they are currently saying no. So the Mets do a great job by adding Devin Williams so far, which bulks up their bullpen with already guys on the roster such as AJ Minter and Brooks Raley. But like we said, the big question with Devin Williams: does Edwin Diaz come back as well? And I mean, listen, obviously, we're going to get into this episode and break down our thoughts on the Devin Williams signing. But I think my initial thoughts is I like it for now. However, I do want to see what the plans are going further ahead with this offseason, which is my thoughts and which was both our thoughts similar to the Marcus Semien and Brandon Nimmo trade, Evan.
Yeah, first of all, great to be back. And also leave a like on your way in. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Turn on your notifications. In terms of the money, the thing that's weird about it, I saw somewhere it was 51 million total, and then I saw somewhere it's 45. So I don't know. He's either making 11 or 12 next year. And when I sent this in the group chat, my initial thought was, okay, I need to see the money because it was a series of tweets before I was able to give my full thoughts. Because the first one I saw was the Mets signed Devin Williams to a 3-year deal. To that, I said, okay, I'm a fan. Back up, booted out there, but I was like, okay, I'm a fan of the contract, but I'm a fan of signing Devin Williams, and honestly, this was the worst kept secret to me. I think that for weeks, months, maybe even longer, I could have told you that Devin Williams would be a target for the Mets this offseason, just given the connection of Stearns to the Brewers, given the fact that Devin Williams struggled this past year with the Yankees. It had David Stearns written all over it. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, I am happy with 3 years, but again, I need to see the AAV before I say anything. And then I see Jeff Passan's tweet that he's going to be making at minimum 51 or at minimum 50 million on the deal. And all of a sudden I said, Diaz isn't coming back because simple math, that was about 16.6 million a year, maybe even more on the contract if it was that over the 3 years. But then when I saw the deferrals, made me feel a lot better because you get a legit setup guy now to pair with Edwin Diaz, hopefully, which that's a thing you have to hope. But the thing I like about this the most is you jump the market for a guy you want. You get an insurance policy for Edwin Diaz if he does departure. Now, the thing really comes down to if you do not bring back Edwin Diaz, are you too late to sign a Suarez? Are you too late to get a Fairbanks? Are you too late to acquire one of these other back-end relievers? Because if you don't bring back Diaz, you have to acquire another reliever because a lot of Devin Williams' success comes as a setup man. Even last year when he got demoted, when Josh Hader was over in Milwaukee, he was paired with Abner Uribe for a bit at the end of his time in Milwaukee. A lot of that comes as a setup guy. And if you are going to have Devin Williams close games, there needs to be some sort of fallback option besides AJ Minter. So I'm a fan, especially with the deferrals, and we'll talk more about everything else with this deal. But initial thoughts, I'm a fan, but Diaz has to come back. Just give him the extra year. If that's really what it's about, just give him the extra year. Get out of your comfort zone because that's what a good team would do, like the Dodgers. You have to get aggressive here to keep him.
100%. And I fully agree with you to the point that, and obviously this is not going to be the only free agent target in terms of reliever, because obviously, like I said, the Mets are still in the Edwin Diaz market, but there's also other guys that are available just in case the Mets do not sign Edwin Diaz. Obviously, like we said, Pete Fairbanks is available, Robert Suarez is available, and I mean, we even start to see the reliever market move a bit a couple days ago with Ryan Helsley which thank God Ryan Halsey's not back with the Mets because he ended up signing with the Baltimore Orioles on a 2-year deal. So I guess good luck to him. But I I think the weird thing about the reliever market so far, because usually because obviously going into it, Diaz was the big closer target for the reliever market, and usually we see with how free agency works, we usually see the big free agent go first to set the market, and then we start to see the little guys come off the market. But at least for this time, it's gone a little bit opposite. Obviously, like I said, Helsley signed yesterday or the day before. Devin Williams tonight. We've heard rumblings that Pete Fairbanks' market is starting to move a little bit quicker. So, you know, when does exactly Edwin Diaz sign? Because now he's not necessarily setting the market, and I think the other thing that does play a part into that is that really Edwin Diaz's market, when you look at it, because of his the qualifying offer and the fact that he's looking for a big multi-year deal. We're hearing the rumors of 4 to 5. 4 to 5 years. He probably wants to top the AAV that he got in his last contract, which was around $25 million. And really, the only teams that we've heard linked to Diaz heavily so far is the Mets and the Dodgers, which makes sense because obviously the Mets want to retain him, and the Dodgers, because they're the best team in baseball right now, and they have shown through multiple off seasons they just want to keep getting better and better and better. So I am scared about the Dodgers still, like, because you can never take them out of pretty much any free agent, and I mean like any. And that, like I said, that is the one thing that scares me with Diaz, because we've kind of heard the rumors that probably ideally the Mets want to go 4 years with Edwin Diaz, but Edwin Diaz is ideally looking for that fifth year to match what he got previously going into the 2023 season. And I think the Mets would be willing to go 5 years. My only concern, though, is would the Dodgers, because this is the difference compared with other big spending market teams and the Dodgers. The Dodgers, because the fact that they're coming off of back-to-back World Series championships, the fact that they have so much deferred money within the whole team, and that obviously starts with Shohei Ohtani and his massive deferments on his contract, are maybe the Dodgers, and this is the one team that can be a little bit stupid with their money. Would they be willing to go a little bit more stupid and maybe offer Diaz a 6th year? Because if they go 6 years for Diaz, he's not coming back to the Mets. He's going to LA. So that is the only thing that scares me with the Dodgers. I think if Diaz is stuck on the 5-year deal, I think the Mets would be willing to go. It's just, it depends on, how long are they willing to drag out these negotiations? Because, like I said, I am not too sure what I think Diaz ideally wants to come back to New York, but obviously for his reasons, his personal reasons, family reasons, he wants to get the best deal for himself because it's going to be his last big free agency contract of his professional career. And like I said, we're a pro player podcast here, and obviously go get your money if you can. I have no problem with that. However, I will say this: I am happy with David Stearns about one thing in this deal, and this was something that, if you guys recall back to the what's it called? After the season, after he had his, after he had his meeting at Citi Field, the one thing Stearns really said he struggled with last year was being proactive, and he was a little bit more reactive in terms of bullpen additions, starting pitching additions, and even in terms of how he reacted with guys going down injured. This I liked by David Stearns, because the fact that he was proactive here. He identified a target that he wanted in Devin Williams, and obviously there's major connections there because Devin Williams was the closer a long time in Milwaukee, even as the setup man under Josh Hader when David Stearns were there. So, and now David Stearns can kind of look at it and say, okay, I have Devin Williams. I have my backup option already. Now, just in case if Diaz doesn't sign or if he doesn't come back to the Mets, I at least have a backup option to where, okay, maybe if the Mets didn't sign Devin Williams first and they spent all their priority on Edwin Diaz, there could have been a strong possibility the Mets lose Diaz. A guy like Devin Williams signs elsewhere, Pete Fairbanks goes elsewhere, and now the Mets are pretty much stuck with nothing. So I like the fact that David Stearns here was a bit proactive and he jumped ahead of the market to sign a guy like Devin Williams.
The Diaz thing, just to touch on that first, I'm not too afraid of the Dodgers going to a 6-year as of now, because I feel like if the Dodgers were willing to give a 5th year right now, I think he'd be gone. I think that he does want to come back, and I think that we're just at this stall period where it's the Mets not wanting to give the 5th year. And, again, I'm not in the negotiations. I'm not going to tell you I know what's going on. But if I was to make a guess and read the lines for this, that's just what my guess would be, that it's really just stall there. Maybe the Mets defer money there if they do go the 5th year. That would be a good common ground, maybe, or a fair ground, if you will. But in terms of the Devin Williams thing with being reactive or being proactive instead of reactive, that was my biggest gripe at the trade deadline with not attacking the reliever market. When I saw guys, and not that the Mets didn't get aggressive there, because I mean, I liked the Helsley move. We all liked the Rogers move. Gregory Soto, it was what it was. But my biggest problem was I watched David Bednar go to the Yankees. I watched Yohan Duran go to the Phillies and a couple of other relievers. And the common theme with those guys was they had years of control attached to them. And I thought, why were the Mets not involved in those type of guys? Because I would have felt a lot more comfortable if Edwin Diaz, again, I don't want Edwin Diaz gone. I think that there's no one better than him. So I'm not sitting here telling you that if they got Bednar or Duran, it's better than Diaz. Maybe Duran, you could argue, but either way, um, I want one of those guys because I wanted a fallback in case Diaz left as that emergency exit, if you will. Uh, but thankfully, Stearns backed up his word, like you said, got reactive or got proactive on the market and got a safety net here instead of doing what he did at the trade deadline, because I'd imagine that's part of it. If he was being this proactive on the reliever market, I'd imagine he has regrets about not going the extra mile to get Duran. I'd imagine he has regrets about not getting Bednar or whoever else got moved with control. So it's nice to see from that perspective. Before I let you jump in, I just want to go to some comments here, though, just to what people are saying in the chat. Ray, what's going on? Great move, Owen, if Diaz is back. Otherwise, the move sucks. I think most of us agree on that. I wouldn't say it sucks, but it's a huge downgrade from Edwin Diaz. So, sure, I guess it does suck in that regard, but I don't think Devin Williams is as bad as the number suggested last year, which I have a graphic on the ready for that when we get to that. Great setup, man. Agree there, Max. Get a Fairbanks also, if not Diaz, and bring Rogers back. I would like Rogers back, depending on the contract that he gets, but I'm not looking to go out of my way to get him because if you bring Diaz back, you kind of have your back for the bullpen set. I would like to see Ross get a chance this year up in the big leagues for a bit. You still have your other group there of relievers. I know that they Reed Garrett's obviously injured going into next year. Max Kranick got non-tendered, so you could argue that they should get Bringer Rogers back to fill out like that crop because right now you're looking at your Brazabons, Nunez if he's able to come back mid-season. I'm not sure when he's going to be available. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have a strong opinion on that one. I don't know if you have an opinion on, the lower tier arms in the bullpen.
I mean, it's going to be interesting, right? Because obviously, for right now at least, because you have Devin Williams locked up for 3 years. You still have Brooks Raley here for another year. You have AJ Minter for another year, and then kind of gets interesting. With guys like Brazabon and stuff. I wonder what other type of relievers as well the Mets do target, just in case they don't bring back Edwin Diaz. Like, because that's also another thing too. Like, ideally, I want to bring back Edwin Diaz because this is something that we've kind of talked about for many years now, and this is kind of something that's been a dream for Met fans was to build that strong 8-9 tandem in the rotation. Obviously, I always talk about this like 2023, like when the Mets brought back Edwin Diaz, when they brought in David Robertson, that was always the dream. David Robertson was going to be the eighth inning guy, and then Edwin Diaz was going to be the shutdown closer for the ninth inning. And then obviously, we all know what happened with Diaz getting hurt in the World Baseball Classic, and then pretty much the Mets. Even though David Robertson was great for the Mets in his short tenure with the Mets ran him into the ground because his numbers dipped a lot by the time he got traded to Miami. And then, kind of last year or not, yeah, well, last year going into the offseason, we kind of hoped that because again, like for me at least, I wanted the Mets to trade for Devin Williams. And obviously they kind of just maybe didn't have the assets to acquire from Milwaukee. Maybe Milwaukee didn't like our prospects per se, but he ends up going to New York, and then he kind of just ends up not having a great year. Obviously, does maybe context play into that? Maybe was he not put in the best position to succeed? Maybe were the Yankees, kind of telling him to mix up his arsenal a bit, maybe, and kind of deviate away from what was working? Because obviously we kind of saw that with Sonny Gray, and he that led him to struggle in his short tenure with the Yankees. So listen, obviously Stearns knows Devin Williams the best. He worked with him for many years in Milwaukee. It's just like I said, if the Mets do not go the route of Edwin Diaz, what are the ways that they're going to spread out the money in terms of who else do they get? Like this was something that Andrew brought up on their on his and Carson's stream, breaking down the Devil Williams signing. Like maybe do they go after a Pete Fairbanks? Maybe is their plan to go, instead of giving 25 million to Edwin Diaz, is it maybe $10 million reliever and maybe two $5 million relievers? Like, it's going to be interesting to see how the Mets attack this. And obviously, no other relievers will be signed, at least for the Mets point of view, probably until Diaz comes off the market, whether he's back here with the Mets or whether, worst case scenario, he ends up going to the Dodgers.
Speaking of which, he's in the chat saying, "Do you think he prefers chicken fingers or nuggets?"
Chicken fingers.
Yeah, it's got to be the chicken fingers. Especially the Shea Stadium ones. Williams is getting paid closer money. I wouldn't be surprised if he closed for them and Diaz is gone. I disagree there because of the deferrals. When I first saw the contract, that was my thought, but once I saw there was deferrals, which that's where my mind went to. Like when I saw that I was like, there's no way they gave Devin Williams 17 million, near 17 million a year. With the deferrals, I think that changes the entire conversation. But I do want to pull up the graphic that I made as the Airbender has arrived in Queens. Last year, his stats in 62 innings, he recorded 18 saves, a 4.79 ERA with a 2.68 FIP attached to it. So hopefully, with the whole run prevention thing, that will help save him from allowing a few more runs and driving up that ERA. Plus, there is context to that a lot of his early season did hurt him, especially when he was the closer. Nonetheless, he had a 1.4 wins above replacement season despite having a down year, 13.06 K per nine, a 3.63 walks per nine. So the walks were actually down from the year prior, even though there were injuries in the year prior. 114 stuff plus and 0.73 home runs per nine. Really, the thing that killed Devin Williams a lot this year was the walks, which is what he's accustomed to usually doing, as well as allowing a lot of hard contact and probably not having the best defense behind him, which there's a reason Yankee fans complain about that. But the year prior, in 21 and 2/3 innings pitched, he recorded 14 saves to a 1.25 ERA, a 2.06 FIP, a .8 WAR, 15.78 Ks per nine, 4.57 walks per nine, 115 stuff plus, 0.42 home runs per nine. And then in terms of the arsenal, when you look at it, he of course has that signature airbender changeup pitch, if you will. And in terms of the usage on that, that's what he used the most in his arsenal. 52% of it made up of that. 125 stuff plus on it. Throws it about 84 miles per hour with a 37.3 whiff percentage. And in terms of your IVB on it, you're looking at a dash 4.8, which, sorry, couldn't fit it on the graphic. And then the four seam, he used that 47% of the time, 103 stuff plus. So still a well-graded fastball there, despite what people say about it. Could touch about 95 with it. The velo was a tick down from what it's been over the past few years. So you're probably looking at him topping at 96, 37.7 whiff percentage. And then in terms of the IVB there, 15.7. And the cutter, use that less than 1% of the time. So there really isn't much to say. And there's a good reason. It's not graded well with an 81 stuff plus, throws at 90 miles an hour. 100% whiff rate, though, considering he only threw it twice. So there's not really much to say there. But yeah, when you look at the graded pitches, though, I mean, his changeup was great at 79, 67 on the four seam, and you're looking at 48 there on the cutter. So he has a really good changeup. Of course, that's a signature pitch, like I mentioned. Really decent fastball to go along with it. all this to be said, you're probably looking at, just given the fact that the numbers suggest it, you're looking at a guy that's better suited in the setup role. I don't know if it was a mental thing jumping to the closer role, especially doing it with the Yankees and the whole thing where he wanted the beard policy or whatever changed. Nonetheless, I don't care about that stuff. I just wonder if some of it was mental to start the season because you started to see him really dial it in and start to improve once he was demoted when Bednar got there, which is why, again, I think it's pivotal you bring back Edwin Diaz to pair with him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think ideally, and like I said, in a perfect world, I think the best option is you bring back Edwin Diaz and you have Edwin Diaz as that eighth inning setup guy, or even, and I know Carlos Mendoza doesn't like to do this, and we've criticized him a lot for this, but maybe, just maybe, you could use Edwin Diaz in the eighth inning or seventh inning against, the opposing lineup's better players. And then because you have that insurance policy of Devin Williams behind him, you could use him to either pitch the eighth inning or even close out the ninth inning. But it, I don't disagree that he can that he can't be a closer here. I still maybe want to give him the benefit of the doubt, similarly to like how we saw Edwin Diaz's first year in New York, where he severely struggled, and maybe it was just to the pressures, to the fan base, just to the different situation of the lifestyles of Milwaukee, New York. Maybe he needed that little 1 year adjustment period because I mean, because when Josh Hader was traded from Milwaukee to San Diego, he was traded at the 2022 trade deadline, and after that, pretty much Devin Williams assumed the closer role in Milwaukee. And I mean, even let me see, let me pull up his 2023 year. I mean, yeah, he pitched to a 1.53 ERA, 61 games, 58 and 2/3 innings. So he pitched well. He pitched well in that year coming out of the closer's role. I mean, even still with this year, his stuff pretty much graded out, fairly well. Because I mean, you put that on the graphic, but even just going more in depth, for his changeup, 194 batting average. Like I said, on the changeup, 204 batting average on the four seamer, expected numbers of 212 for the changeup, and expected batting average of 176 for the four seamer. So he still has very good stuff. Obviously, like I said, the cutter he did not throw a lot. He only threw it twice. But I mean, even going back to 2023, his cutter was not good. He threw that 29 times, and that got hit hard. 333 batting average, 309 expected batting average, and the slugging numbers on that aren't exactly great either. So like I said, ideally in a perfect world, you want to pair him up with Edwin Diaz. You have him as a setup guy in the eighth inning, have Diaz as the main closer for the ninth inning. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Devin Williams could automatically come to the Mets, flip a switch, maybe be a little bit more comfortable. The fact that he'll be spending his second year now in New York. Like I said, spent the first year with the Yankees, now for the next 3 years with the Mets. Maybe he needed that 1 year adjustment period, like Devin Williams, to say, okay, I figured out my stuff. Maybe, like I said, now he'll be much more comfortable in that closing spot.
Yeah, and like I mentioned as well, I mean, I'm a big believer in looking at FIP and it being, a indicator of how much your team is hurting you. And it's pretty clear that he got hurt a lot from his defense. And like I've said time and time again, the Yankees are not a good defensive team. We see Yankee fans, because of the fact that they're the crosstown team, we see Yankee fans crying all the time about how Volpe doesn't play a good shortstop, about how they don't get good third base play from their revolving carousel of third baseman until McMahon got there, how they don't have, you know, good defense over at first base at times, second base, wherever it is, center field. I don't know. Because we know that center field defense could be a problem at times, of course. But um, nonetheless, I think that to go along with this whole run prevention thing, this is where we need to see the rest of the offseason play out. We need to see what else David Stearns has in store to help out the pitchers, because pitching's part of run prevention, defense is part of run prevention. They go cohesive as well. You need good defense behind your pitching. And, that's one of the things that the Mets, I don't want to say, I mean, they did thrive at in 2024. I should say they did. In 2024, a lot of their pitchers got help. I mean, David Peterson, we joke about it all the time, how a lot of his success, we call him results man, because look at the defense. He got behind him a lot of different times. You need to be able to give these pitchers good defense behind him. And I think that this is why we say it's the next in a series of culture changing moves.
Yeah, I'm very much interested to see what the rest of the additions, even not so because I know offensively it is important too because what did the Mets do with Pete Alonso, guys like that? Do they bring him back? Maybe do they target another former Yankee who's currently a free agent? Because I'm sure we would both like him too in the outfield or possibly at first base, depending how the rest of the offseason shapes up. But there's a lot of moves that the Mets can make to improve their defense. Obviously, like we talked about and especially, we had the stream last week where we talked about the Mets trading Nimmo to the Rangers for Marcus Semien. So now pretty much you have your defense up the middle sorted, at least for the next couple of years. Obviously, we know that Francisco Lindor, even though he didn't have the greatest time at shortstop last year defensively, had a couple of mishaps. Maybe with the fact that he's going to play next to a guy that actually has a decent glove and not next to a guy that he likes to choke out. In the dugout, maybe that's going to help him. Be a little bit more sharper in terms of defense. But we know that Marcus Semien, he's an elite Gold Glove defender. And obviously the next moves are, what are the plans at first base? Because if Pete Alonso's back, okay, we know that necessarily he's not the greatest glove there at first base. At third base, Brett Beatty is so far the starting opening day third baseman. And I know he's been relatively better since he's come up to the major leagues in terms of improving his defense, but maybe do the Mets look to improve, their defense at third base? And then obviously the outfield is obviously important. And we know that, behind the plate, the Mets do have a solid defensive tandem with both Francisco Alvarez and Luis Torrens. But like I said, the outfield is going to be important. Obviously, we know that Juan Soto is going to be there in right field, but center field and left field, what do they do there? Obviously, we know that Tyrone Taylor, Hoopist, is back in center field. Is he going to get, how much of a, starting time is he going to get there at center field to start off the regular season? Does maybe Carson Bench crack the roster through maybe a decent spring training? And like I said, in left field, do the Mets maybe add Cody Bellinger? Maybe do they go to Chicago White Sox and try to trade for a guy like Luis Robert Jr.? Maybe we even heard, rumors that the Astros are looking to trade away Jake Myers, who's been a very good center fielder throughout his time in Houston so far. So there's a lot of possibilities that the Mets can do and David Stearns can do in terms of attacking, and improving their defense and improving the run prevention. Obviously, like I said, we're going to see what happens because, the offseason is so far, it's only short, it's only December 1st. And, but so far, and, the Mets have made two moves, but they're two big moves. Pause.
Yeah, and this is what we talked about, how they need to get aggressive this offseason and they need to make those significant changes. I said at the end of the season, we were both in agreement on it. And we said it all of last week during coverage of the Semien trade that this is going to be a different looking team next season, and rightfully so. And Stearns told you, he told all of us right in our faces, this is going to be different, without saying it, by saying, yeah, we want to be better with run prevention. So none of this should come as a surprise. It's just really a matter of, and again, I hate to say this because everyone wants our instant reaction and wants us to either throw things or, be on the moon about certain moves. It's hard to do that when you don't know what the rest of the offseason is going to be. I am glad that they're jumping the market before other teams, because what other teams have really made any moves? The Mariners kept Naylor, and what was Phil Maton went to the Cubs, Helsley to the Orioles. Like,
Blue Jays signed Dylan Cease.
Right, that was the other one. And it's like, outside of that, there's not been a lot of teams getting active on the market, for all this talk about how Stearns doesn't do anything. But this is what we should hope for. And now you're in a spot where you could play the market differently with Edwin Diaz. You do not have to be in a rush to get something done. And maybe that helps them keep it down to a 4-year deal. And if they do keep it to a 4-year deal, maybe that gives them more flexibility if they're able to, defer some of that money or backload some of that money to the back end years. Maybe it gives you flexibility to sign a middle rotation piece to a short-term deal, to a 2-3-year deal. Maybe it gives you flexibility to give Cody Bellinger that deal that he's looking for. Whatever it may be, This is why you want to see your general manager be proactive versus reactive, which is what we talk about with hockey all the time. And like you said at the top of the episode here, this is I'm glad that we're seeing Stearns learn his lesson from last year. He admitted that it was a problem, and you're seeing it in action now.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. Listen, I always said that for me at least, and I know other people have the right to have different opinions. I always said that I fully trusted Stearns. I always thought that he was gonna, prevent the mistakes or at least learn from the mistakes that he made last year and fix in terms of being more aggressive and going after guys that the Mets desperately need. Because even right now, I mean, the Mets have made two big moves so far with acquiring Marcus Semien for second base and adding Devin Williams to their to the back of their bullpen, but there's still other moves that the Mets need to make. So, like I said, this is only the start, but like you said, and like I said at the start, it's great to see that the Mets are at least being proactive. And like I said, and like we said, they had to be proactive because with how last season went and with how they collapsed down the stretch, you could not afford to run the same thing back. And as we know, another team that we root for usually does that because all the times we hear in the rumors that there's gonna be major changes to the team in the offseason, and then we see nothing and it's the same team run back, and then people wonder why the team is shit. But at least for this point, at least for the Mets point of view, I like the fact that the Mets are being aggressive and that Stearns, like you said, has learned his lesson from last offseason and last trade deadline. It's still early and a lot more moves need to be made, but at least for the start of the offseason, and like you also said, Evan, what other teams have really done anything massive, especially in the National League? Like no other National League team has made a big move. Like the teams that we're all competing. I know the Dodgers are the Dodgers, and they just pulled random money out of their ass, and they're already the best team in Major League Baseball. But the Phillies haven't done anything significant. The Braves haven't done anything significant so far. The Cubs, they're good, probably going to lose Kyle Tucker because they don't want to spend big money. So at least I like that the Mets are jumping the gun and being aggressive so far. It's also something, and I know this is not relevant for this stream because this is more offensive talk, but it's kind of something I want them to do with the Pete Alonso market. Maybe jump ahead, sign a guy like Cody Bellinger, and maybe put more pressure on Pete Alonso to sign with the Mets a little early because we've kind of heard early rumors so far in the offseason that maybe Pete Alonso doesn't have the greatest market, and this is something that we
Shocker.
saw last year as well. So maybe, like I said, and especially the GM meetings, or not the GM, the winter meetings are coming up in a couple days. So maybe if we see the Mets sign a guy like Cody Bellinger, maybe a guy like Kyle Schwarber, or maybe even in fantasy land that we live, maybe they sign Kyle Tucker, and maybe that forces Pete Alonso to say, maybe I'm not in the greatest negotiating position. Maybe I should just go back to the Mets. So we'll obviously see what happens. Like I said, it's still early, but we like the fact that the Mets are being, and David Stearns is being aggressive early so far in the offseason.
Yeah, and it's on at least the right pieces, I think, because last year when they jumped the market, it was for Frankie Montas, and that was just a scenario where it's like you're jumping the market, but just not on the right guy. And that's the only thing that is frustrating about this is that, you know, I want to be fair to Stearns, but it sucks so much that last offseason happened because now he's tied into money on guys that you have Montas who's not even on the team. He's tied into that Mania deal. But nonetheless, yeah, that's why I'm hoping that we're gonna see more of it. Maybe the trade market moves as well soon, which we'll see about that. But the fun part is, most of all, if they're able to sign Edwin Diaz, all of a sudden your bullpen, all you have to worry about is attacking like the lower end market of relievers. And I think that I could be wrong, but just gut feeling, I feel like the Edwin Diaz thing is going to come to a resolution within the next 2 weeks. Like that's just my gut
Yeah.
feeling. By the end of the winter meetings, I just think he'll be signed, whether it's here or the Dodgers, hopefully here. And then, like I said, you just have to attack the lower end of the reliever market, and that's going to be a fun conversation of who they could sign there. Do you take a flyer on a Jordan Romano to bounce back? Do you take a flyer on Evan Phillips coming back from an injury? Do you take a flyer, which I know we want? Do you take a flyer on Jonathan Loizaga, who's had a lot of injuries, but gives you a lot of options there to get creative with the rest of the bullpen? But it also gives you the opportunity to see where you're at financially. And then I think we're going to start to see okay, this is where the Mets are going to go with their outfield. Uh, this is where the Mets are going to go with the Alonso thing. So I think there's still a few checkpoints that we have to go through. We have to still see Jeff McNeil shot out of a cannon. We still have to see Kodai Senga shipped to the moon. So, like I said, we still have a few checkpoints to go here. They still got to clear some money before I think things start to move along. But all of a sudden, you clear up that Jeff McNeil contract. That's basically the Devin Williams money. You free up Kodai Senga. That's 15 million of probably 20 that Edwin Diaz is going to make unless there's deferrals in there. Then all of a sudden, you still have the Pete Alonso money that was freed up. You got money to work with there. Do you keep him? What do you do there? It sucks that you're probably not going to be able to clear more money than that. You were hoping to maybe get Brandon Nimmo off the books without taking a big contract back, which didn't happen. But nonetheless, I mean, it's good. It's still a long off season, and I'm just excited to see what's to come. Really, I'm just more I should say I'm excited but nervous. I'm really nervous about this Diaz thing. But once that's resolved, because I think he's gonna stay. I don't know why I just have this confidence he will. Once pen's to paper there, um, then I think it's just gonna be interesting from there because who they trade for, starting pitching wise, what bats do they acquire. I just think that's the domino that needs to fall for the rest of this to start moving.
Yeah, 100%. I personally think I think Diaz will sign during the winter meetings. Like I don't see this dragging into January because pretty much it's only two teams, and I mean unless Diaz wants to start a bidding war between the Mets and Dodgers, and even then, like I said, I don't think the Mets would be willing to just go blast over the moon and just give Diaz whatever he wants. I think the Mets want him back. I think David Stearns wants him back, but I think they also want to be smart about it. And I think also an interesting thing is because usually we see with the Dodgers, and the Dodgers are known for deferring all this money. And I'm pretty sure, like I said, pretty much everyone on the roster has deferred money, whether you go through Teoscar Hernandez, Mookie Betts, Tanner Scott. I think maybe the possibility that the Mets deferred money in Devin Williams' contract, maybe that gets them a little bit more of an advantage because maybe the Dodgers are going to defer more money in their offer for Diaz, and maybe the Mets could offer that luxury of giving more money up front to Edwin Diaz, which maybe might be more enticing to him personally. Obviously, I don't know, fully what Diaz wants, but I fully believe, and I think, like you said, I don't know if Diaz would be back 100%, but I think he wants to be back as a Met. And really, I think it's just that fifth year thing. I think if the Mets get to that fifth year, Edwin Diaz will be back in pen, and the paper will be signed with the pen, and he'll be back here, and then we'll all be happy. But I mean, even just looking ahead to if Diaz does come back, you're looking at your back four of your bullpen of Edwin Diaz, Devin Williams, Brooks Raley, AJ Minter. You have four solid, reliable guys there, and now pretty much like you said, you fill out the rest of your bullpen with cheap under the radar guys, maybe for some bounce back candidates, and pretty much the only thing you're hoping for. And obviously, the Mets are still going to have to attack the starting pitching market, and hopefully they acquire that back-to-back Cy Young winner from Detroit and Tarek Skubal. Like we said, the biggest thing that especially held back the Mets bullpen last year coming down the second half was the fact that you got barely any innings out of your starting pitchers. If you could actually get some length out of your starting pitchers, now you're not going to have to, burn. You're not going to have to burn as much of your bullpen, and you could save some fresh ammo. And you can afford to use more of Diaz and Devin Williams and Minter and Brooks Raley, because even then, like, how much of Edwin Diaz did we actually see last year in the second half? It wasn't a lot because he wasn't really put in a position to come in, for saves. Either the Mets were getting blown out heavily, or the Mets were blowing out another team. And most of the time, it was the Mets getting blown out in the second half. So, like I said, if everything could just come together and they get the starting pitching help, they get more innings out of them, and now you have this back end, this big four in the back of your bullpen. That just makes the Mets a much better team, and especially we know come playoff time, because it's about pitching. I know that offense is important, and you need to score runs, and that's something that held back this Mets team a lot last year. But as we saw, you need arms, and you need a lot of reliable arms, because even like look at the Dodgers last year. Like, their bullpen was so bad, but because of their strength of their rotation and the fact that they were able to eat so much innings, especially like a guy like Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who just the guy was a fucking machine in the playoffs last year, that helped them overcome that problem. So obviously, like I said, we'll see what happens. I think Diaz will be back. It's just a matter of the Mets will give him that fifth year. And I think eventually, and like I said, maybe the fact that Devin Williams got deferred money and the fact that the Mets can offer maybe some more, money up front to Diaz, I think that can maybe help their case in terms of bringing him back. But we'll obviously see.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to read between the tea leaves here with this Diaz thing. And when I sent that thing earlier, I think it was from Tacoma that
Yeah.
the Dodgers are the front runner or whatever. I'm like, just give him the fifth year. But I also know like this has to be a negotiation tactic because to me, I feel like the Dodgers are in a spot where they're desperate for a closer that they would just give him that fifth year. It's really just Diaz trying to give this opportunity to the Mets. Like, I think this is why I feel strong that he's going to come back. I feel like he wants to be back. But again, it really comes down to could they just give him that fifth year? And when you look at this bullpen right now, you really need to. Like, again, I'm happy about this Devin Williams signing. I think it's really good for the back end of the bullpen, but as a bridge, because you have a good four-arm or good three arms to bridge to Diaz, the rest of the bullpen looks really shaky right now. Um, to me, it's just like just get this thing done. Like just get this thing done. And again, I don't know what's going on with the negotiations exactly, but I just want to see this thing get done and over with because then you could form the rest of your bullpen. Then you could talk rotation. You could talk the lineup as well. See what you could figure out there. But overall, just to get back to like the main root of the conversation here with Devin Williams, and to tie this whole thing up, I think that it's an intriguing arm. I think that, you know, did the Mets technically overpay? Sure, you could argue it, but I also argue the reliever market's so weird. Ryan Helsley just got 14 million a year. The pitching market in general is weird that this is what's going to be. And all I'll say is I'm happy Devin Williams is here. If he's with Edwin Diaz, if Edwin Diaz is not back, we need to see Devin Williams tandem with another closer because I don't trust Devin Williams as the closer by himself.
Yeah, 100%. And even when this signing broke, like, well, so now we're coming up on 2 hours ago. It was weird because usually with the free agent signing, it's like you're either like ecstatic and happy that you signed this player, or you're either like what we had like with Frankie Montas last year, where you're like, I'm not really for this deal. It was weird with Devin Williams. I was like in the middle, and then depending on how the news went, because obviously, like I said, the 3 years came out. I was kind of like, okay, does this maybe take them out of the Edwin Diaz market? And then I saw the money, and Jeff Passan first had guaranteed over $50 million, and I'm like, yeah, they're probably not bringing back Edwin Diaz. But then obviously the John Heyman tweet came out with the deferred money, and then obviously, like I said, we saw the tweets from guys like DeComo, Martino, Passan again that the Mets are still in the Edwin Diaz market, and that all of a sudden made me like, okay, I'm cool for this deal right now. Obviously, like I said, if Diaz doesn't come back, I'm still fine with the Mets signing Devin Williams because I think he can be a very good reliever and a very good valuable reliever. It's just how are you going to pair with Devin Williams? Because like I said, I think and like you said, you need an insurance backup option just in case you don't have Edwin Diaz. Whether it's a guy like Pete Fairbanks, whether it's a guy like Robert Suarez, or maybe the Mets make a trade for a reliever that that we're not currently thinking about. But like I said, hopefully best case scenario, Diaz is back. And like I said, I think, and it's like you said also, I think he's going to sign during the winter meetings. It's just it's a matter of when. Hopefully to the next couple of days. Hopefully to tomorrow. Hopefully we get a breaking news live from the Mets sign Edwin Diaz tomorrow. Obviously, we'll see what happens, but yeah, I'm hoping for the best case scenario.
Yeah, definitely you and I both in that regard. I don't know, it just sucks because like for the player itself, I like the contract. I like the player. It's really just it sucks that it's like, yeah, but only if Diaz is back. Like I don't know. It's just an unfortunate situation. But do you have anything else to add before I wrap this up here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's gonna be it, everybody. Watch out for tomorrow because we're probably going to do a podcast episode tomorrow, probably around 4 o'clock. I think that's the time that best works for us. So yeah. Well, obviously we'll probably talk maybe a little bit more about this. Obviously, we'll talk more about the Nimmo Semien trade, and obviously there were some other reports that came out with the Mets clubhouse stories, even though I think some of that and both of us agree that some of those stories are a bit exaggerated and bullshit. And obviously, we had other news that the Mets also completed their coaching staff, so we can go over that as well and discuss and talk about what we like there or what we don't like. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much going to wrap it up. And see you guys tomorrow for another podcast episode.
Yep. Thank you everyone for watching. Leave a like, subscribe. See you guys tomorrow.